Welcome everybody. We're up to now, about 30 attendees, which is great for only 2 minutes past the hour. Hello everybody and welcome to Office Hours for the last week in February. Gosh, we're at the last week in February already. And another topic session. So at the end of the month, we pick a specific subject, and we do a bit of show and tell as well as answering your questions. So this time we're going to talk about affiliations. I kind of titled this Affiliations, the why and the how. And I'm delighted that we've got a great panel of very experienced affiliations users and many other things as well joining us this time. But just a reminder, none of us work for Salesforce.org. These sessions are all run by the Hub community, and we're all volunteering our time and talents to share our Salesforce knowledge with you. And as usual, we can't cover every aspect of such a big topic in one short hour, but I hope we'll give you some ideas, some tips and tricks, some things to think about or go and explore for yourself. If you have questions on affiliations, please feel free to post them in the chat as we're going along, and we'll pause for the answers or try and incorporate them into what we're discussing. As usual, since there are a lot of you on the call, welcome everyone. We'd be grateful if you could mute your mic throughout the session, unless you're presenting or we ask you to speak, of course. So thank you for that. And enough of the introductions. Let's just start with, shall we, with a very quick definition for anyone who might have heard of affiliations but hasn't really tried to use them yet. Would anyone like to just sum up what are affiliations, and why would you use affiliations?
Sure. Happy to do that, Caroline.
I know you have lots of quite specific examples, Terry. So, as I think Sara, you were just going to do a quick.
Great.
I can do a quick. But go ahead, Terry.
No, Sara, you can do it, please.
Okay. Well, affiliations are what they call in Salesforce a junction object, which means that they join together and serve as carrying relationships for two different objects. So it's basically the object in Salesforce that ties together a contact and an account. And they are extremely useful. Back in the day, we used to make our own custom affiliation objects for all of our clients, and we were oh so happy when we convinced everybody that we were working with in the nonprofit success pack, starter pack at the time, to please put it in there, so we didn't need to do it anymore. Basically, their role is for you to be able to track relationships between people and organizations that might not be their primary organization lookup. And even if it is for their primary organization lookup, you can still track their roles at the organization in that way. So they're extremely powerful and useful in that regard.
But I mean, don't you
and Terry can give some examples.
But don't you have a relationship between the contact and account already? Why would you need it?
Yeah, so you have one relationship with a contact and account already. And oftentimes, a person will play multiple roles in multiple places that you need to track. Additionally, if you're using the household model in the NPSP, your one lookup to an account is already stolen away by its household. And so you have no way then to tie it to any other organizations, where they work, if they sit on the board, any of that. If they used to, have a relationship there with whatever reason you need to track, any of that is not possible in the household model to track any longer through the primary account lookup. So one uses affiliations for that. But even if you're not using the household model, so most of the clients that I work with don't do traditional fundraising, and we do program management implementations for them, and we always use affiliations for tracking various roles that people hold in organizations.
Oh, I see. So you mean you might have like a one-to-one account or a household for them, but if they're working with a bunch of, I don't know, universities or different companies or something, that's all tracked through affiliations. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yes. And a lot of times people want to track multiple roles. So they might be the CFO in one place and they might be the board member for another organization. They want to know about both of those roles. So it can be your role with your primary organization that you work for, or it can be your role with another organization that is not your employer. It can be a role with any type of business entity that's tracked in accounts.
Great. Because Terry, I think you particularly use affiliations for board memberships, don't you? Is that with your own organization, or do you use affiliations in much broader ways?
I use it in very broad ways. I try to use it every time to connect a person in an organization. We use it for tracking internal roles at Street Youth Ministry. Sometimes when a user isn't a Salesforce user, but they have a role at Street Youth Ministry, we use it for that. We use it for our board members, current and past. We use it for officer positions at our organization, current and past. I use it to identify board members of grant-making organizations, current and past. I actually claim that beyond actual contact information and just transactional data, like they gave this amount of money or they volunteered on such and such a day, that the affiliation object may be the most fruitful object to invest in and really collect the data for.
Oh, that's interesting.
Bold affiliation statement.
Absolutely. So
I think nonprofits are different. In a commercial application, the reason there typically was only one connection between a contact and their account is because when you leave that account, you're no longer interesting. But that's not at all true in the nonprofit world. The nonprofit world is probably the most relational business in the world, and we care a great deal about where everyone's connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing, is that they do have a state associated with them, not a state as in the state that they live in, but a state as in a transactional state. So as Terry was just saying, they can be current or former or even future, depending on how fancy you want to get with them. So you can, so you know the kind of the history of somebody's relationships with accounts, not just their current ones.
Yes, because there are start dates and end dates as well, aren't there? So you can be very specific how the relationship changed. Yeah.
There are indeed.
I'm wondering, and then there is this also in the newer versions of the NPSP, you can designate a primary affiliation. Paige, have you used that? Could you just briefly explain how that works? Oh.
Sorry.
That's all right. I was giving you a chance to talk, Paige, but I may have asked you the wrong question, which was
No.
It's about the primary affiliation in NPSP and how that works.
Right, and I just put a article in the chat as well about that.
Thank you.
So if you're using the household account model, you would generally use the primary affiliation as where they work. So you've got, the account would be their household, and then you would designate the place that they work as their primary affiliation. But, it depends on exactly how you're using affiliations, but that's probably the most common use. And then they might have other affiliations like boards that they're on, or organizations that they volunteer for, or past employers, but that allows you to kind of flag the one main one that's important to you.
And I think, isn't that right, that for anybody who hasn't used this, it's that you check a box on the affiliation to designate it as the primary one, and then it'll show up on their contact record, doesn't it? That's
exactly. Yep. And this article talks about what is a primary contact, which is another designation you can put for an organization or household. And it's also a checkbox. And then the primary affiliation would be, you check that one off for the contact to the organization. So got them going both ways.
That's cool.
There's two bits of automation associated with the primary affiliation checkbox. The first is, if you check it on an affiliation, the NPSP or the new versions of NPSP behind the scenes uncheck any other affiliation that you have that you previously had marked as primary. And then it also it fills in a lookup field on the contact.
Yep.
With the organization. So
yeah, so under contact details, there's a primary affiliation lookup field that will populate in there.
I was just trying to, there we go. Yeah, I was, I think, I'm sorry there isn't any data in this instance, but I thought just while we were talking, I'd show a picture. So there is indeed, there's the primary checkbox on affiliation. I was looking at some of the questions that are starting to come in. I think, Terry, you had predicted we might get into this topic. Just what is the kind of the difference between having contacts associated with accounts and this business? And there's a question from Pete Fife, which sort of sums this up, is this whole idea of, do you have multiple contacts associated with a particular account, or should you go the other route, which is that you say, okay, the contact has one account which is their household and multiple affiliations. How do you all, panel, do you all come down on the on kind of, I suppose, what's now generally recommended as the way to work this, which is this idea of the household and many affiliations? Or do you have strong views either way?
I'm going to answer first if Sara will let me, because I think she has a broader perspective. So I'll give you the narrow perspective first. It's narrow because I don't have as much experience with as many orgs or instances as Sara does. I follow the best practice, which means every household, every contact is affiliated to an account, or I'm sorry, every household is connected to an account where they live, even if I don't know anything about it. And they are affiliated to every other place that I know about where they live, work, play, worship, socialize, learn, etc. And I don't have any contacts directly attached to organizational accounts. And that allows me to think in only one way when I want to think about finding all the people who are associated with certain organizational accounts. And that's why I like it. I call the other model the mixed model, and it definitely can work. I feel like it doesn't have benefits for me, but the mixed model can definitely work. Now I'll stop talking, and Sara probably has a broader experience set and can add some light beyond that.
Sara, what do you reckon? Or I see Paige, you're talking about what Terry's just referred to as the mixed model, I think. No, Sara, sorry, we can't hear you. You are talking.
Yeah, I think we tend to assume that most nonprofits are B2C model, in which case the household account and using, having that be the primary makes sense. But I think there's, quite a few nonprofits that are mixed, where they're B2B and B2C, and then there are some where they're primarily B2B, right? And so I think that is one factor in how you might want to set this up. Because in a B2B model, your primary relationship and maybe only relationship with them is going to be through whatever company they work for. And in that case, if they don't have a personal relationship, if they've not volunteered for you, if they've not donated personal money to you, you may opt to not have them in a household because that's not your relationship with them.
And so what do you recommend? Do you then do, Paige, do you then recommend to your clients that they have a sort of kind of practice that if that person, if you do get to know that person as an individual because they volunteer or because they give you money, that then you would change the account, their relationship to the account? Mm.
Yep, that's exactly what we generally recommend. And that does occasionally happen, that they may all of a sudden, become a personal donor or start volunteering or have some other kind of connection in that way. And at that point, you can create a household for them and make that their primary account, and then use affiliations for the business stuff.
To show how the relationship originated. Dodie's just asked a question to just to the organizers, so not maybe not everyone has seen it, but she's asking what's the downside of doing a pure contact household affiliations model, even if you've got one of these mixed business to business or business to consumer environments. So, anyone?
Well, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Well, I switched back to the old-fashioned telephone.
I'm so glad you're back, Sarah.
I was like, oh, gee, no one can hear me. So what I've found is that if your primary function is around fundraising, or one of your primary functions is around fundraising, and the type of fundraising where you have many of your constituents involved or hopefully involved, then even if you also have kind of a B2C type of relationship, usually people like to use the household model at that point. But what we've heard here on office hours and what I've seen is that sometimes people go with the best practice without actually evaluating if it's right for them. So I personally find that the kind of general idea that this is the best practice, I find troubling, because it is only the best practice for people who do fundraising or do it extensively. It is definitely not a best practice for people who do no fundraising, because then they have all these household accounts that make no sense to them and they don't understand why we're there. And we've heard people on office hours come in and say, well, I followed the instructions and I'm not understanding why I have these things and I don't have any of my primary, like, employer, employee, or whatever it is you want to track relationships and contacts. So the one nice thing about having a model where you have their primary account as their lookup on their contact record is that standard reporting in Salesforce expects that, and so do some third-party applications. And so there's a lot of tools that just do more easy reporting and dashboards and metrics and analytics when you have the primary kind of business relationship with the contact set. It doesn't mean that the household model is bad. It's not bad at all, but it's really useful for when you're actually doing fundraising, especially when you have people who are in households. So some people do fundraising, but all of the people that they do it with aren't individuals. They're corporations, they're, government entities, they're whatever they are. And in that case, the household model doesn't really make sense either, because you don't know who they personally are, nor who their spouse might be. So, it really works when you kind of are dealing with individuals and fundraising, I think. And I personally don't really, I kind of think you either go with a household model or you go with a mixed model where it's employer, employee, and individual accounts. I don't tend to do a mix when it comes to the households. I usually the people we come across with that just kind of stick with households for everyone, even if there are also B2C relationships.
And do you still have? But do you still have uses for affiliations, even if you're doing the kind of the standard model? So if people are associated with their company, you can still use it. Yeah.
I mean, I think that I can't even think of a client we've had where we haven't installed affiliations, even when they don't have the MPSP. You can get an older version of the affiliations package. It doesn't have primary affiliation checkbox. It's not quite as fancy, but you can get an older standalone version of it. And we even install that still in instances today for the affiliations functionality because we think it's so nice. Because even if you're using the primary account lookup on something, you have no history. And a lot of people like to know the history of a person. Where were they? Where are they going to? You know, if you needed a contact who is at a certain organization and you don't have any that are currently there, oh, but you have these 3 that used to be there and maybe they know someone, you know, it's fantastic for networking.
Yeah, and I would say another potential downside, depending on the volume of this, if you go with the strict, like everybody gets a household and using that, is that it could become a storage issue if you have large quantities and you're already near your storage limits because you're creating a household and whatever accounts that they're affiliated with. So
Absolutely. I mean, that doesn't usually come into play unless you're in the 6 figures of accounts. But yes, absolutely. We've had clients that have millions of records and have to put them into buckets.
Gaurav, do you want to comment a little more? You just put something in chat about the mixed hybrid model and about donations. What's
we don't have NPSP. We're kind of predate that, but we have the exact same cost setup for affiliations. And we've ended up with a hybrid mix of some folks in households and some folks and kind of your regular standard account structure. And I'm very interested in this conversation because we're kind of poking on what approach to take, especially with there's the new option of contacts to multiple accounts, which is a whole nother kind of barrel of monkeys to dig into. So we're kind of have all options on the table right now. But one thing we find fairly often is we have donations. People just, you know, click new donation from a contact and it gets allocated to that account regardless of whether that makes sense or not, because people aren't looking at that. So we either need like a flow or some way to really guide people through the process and say, is this, you know, even I'm considering only allowing people to create donations from accounts and setting the contacts on the opportunity itself, but we're kind of thinking through a lot of these implications ourselves right now in terms of what's going to be best for users.
It's not rocket science, but I'm going to say that whatever you do when it comes to a hybrid model, it's important to set down all your business practices and all your reporting needs and make sure that you can very clearly and definitively segregate your database into those which are going to be affected by the household model type of processes and those which are going to be affected by the more traditional connected straight to the organizational account. If you can't do that, I think you're going to run into a lot of trouble down the line. And so when I see people doing hybrid models, or even when I've done them, it's just real important to be able to distinguish exactly which donations apply to which and exactly which people apply to which and so on. So because you're going to duplicate those reporting and processes and maintenance processes. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just want to be 100% crystal clear which piece of data belongs to which processes.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a comment made here in the chat by Bill, and he said, unrelated to affiliations, for the household model, he finds that it's useful, that the household model is useful for deactivating community members as the account controls that process. So it's true, it's kind of a side point, but I actually kind of find the opposite is true. But what I'm going to say involves communities as well. And so I'm really glad you brought up this point, which is that for security for Partner Portal, and not so much for the customer portal, and I think that's probably where the household model can work for that. But for security around the Partner Portal, you absolutely need people to be under the company that they belong to be able to have the right permissions once they're in the portal and to be able to do the proper security around it. And so that's a great instance of a place where you really can't use the household model if you're going to have a partner community. And we do have a lot of clients who have partner communities. So that's, and if you want the kind of the sharing and the security to work properly. So that's just a good point about that. And I do have one other thing that I just wanted to throw out there. It's totally random, but and it's a very small point. But with affiliations, we almost always put a custom field on that's a pick list for values of the relationships. Because nearly entirely, unlike the relationship object where you can have like all sorts of different things, and those even have pick lists anyway these days, but with the affiliation, it's a type and field for the role. And so we almost always remove that field from the layout and put a custom pick list in, because people want to be able to go and see, is this a board member? Is this whatever it is? And so, and when people are typing things in, as I'm sure you all know, you get all sorts of different variations with, it might be CFO, it might be chief financial officer, it might, there might be like too many spaces. I mean, whatever it is, but that way you kind of, if you have a certain set of roles that you're looking at that are important, you can put them into a pick list, and that way people will be really consistent with their data and your reporting will be more accurate. Thanks for
That's a great point. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I was following what you. So there's so there's let's see, Matthew's point a little earlier on. Downside about to the strict model is the way that membership benefits should accrue to household accounts based on donations that live in a donor advised fund. So okay. And then you were also and then Matthew came back a little bit later about with a point about emails to the right records. So he's suggesting, is this that it may be an issue if you've got if the staff of foundations or other organizations have households, your kind of work emails with those staff members are going to roll up in their household record, rather than actually you want them to be associated with the organization. So that's an interesting point. And any thoughts from the panel how you get around that? And then we'll come back to Lauren's question about roll-ups. So to this idea, if all of the staff members of organizations that you deal with are in households, but actually you're using something like an Outlook integration and you're emailing just to do with the foundation or the organization, but that email thread is going to end up on the staff member's household record or their personal record. Any thoughts about that or how you deal with that?
I think that's a true statement. It's what I want. It's what I want, but I can see why some people would want the other. But anyway, I think it's a true statement, and I'm not sure the integrations can do much about it today.
I believe for a tool like Cirrus, you can change that. Takes an extra step, but you can say, no, I don't want it affiliated to this account. I want it affiliated to that account.
I was going to say that as well. That's my understanding, but I'm not very familiar with the standard now, like, because people use that, I'm not very familiar with the standard Gmail integration yet, so I'm not sure if that's also a feature of Salesforce's integrations or not.
Let's take a couple more. Of these questions, and then I know, Terry, you had, I think, some things that you were willing to show us about how you use affiliations. So there was a question from Lauren Corrie about roll-ups. She says she's using the MPSP. When you add contacts to an organizational account instead of using affiliations, how does that affect roll-ups? Should the donations that are made by the organization, will they roll up to the contact on the org account? For example, if the CEO is just associated with the account, will you see organizational donations rolling up on his account, his or her account.
Not if that person isn't on the opportunity. If the opportunity is only attributed to the organization, I believe the answer is no.
Oh, so you mean, so yeah, it would be to do with the contact roles, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I don't even think you can, with the current engine, which I'm thoroughly frustrated with, the current roll-up configuration setting, I cannot wait for the new one. I don't believe there's even any possible way to have NPSP directly roll up. If a donation is attached to the organization, I don't think there's any possible way to make it roll up to a contact as a hard credit.
Yeah,
I think it specifically will not do that, which I find extremely frustrating. That's about to get better whenever the new engine comes out. But it will only accrue to the contact. I think it's the best practice. If the donation came from the organization, then it should go to you should attach it to the organizational account, and NPSP will update all the statistics associated with that account, but it will have no impact on the contacts that are affiliated with that account, even if they're the primary contact for the organization, or even if it's marked as the primary affiliation.
What if they're marked as the primary contact role on the op? No?
Yeah, what you can't do is add soft credit. And if I misspoke, I apologize because it's somewhat confusing, but I've gone round and round trying to make hard credit accrue to someone from an organizational account, and I can find no way to do it today.
I think Leslie just replied, which is what I had just suggested, which I believe is true, although I'm no MPSDS expert, but she's saying that which is what I said, is that if the contact's marked as primary on the op in the contact roles, then it should roll up, and she's saying it does. But Paige is now saying that that's a soft credit. So, okay.
I think we're answering two different things. I was answering Felice's question about peer-to-peer fundraising and whether affiliations were the way to go with that. And I was saying for that, you would use contact roles on the donation to show the influence of another contact, right. And then it's a soft credit for them, depending on how you've structured it.
So I think just to go back to Lauren's question, Lauren, the secret here is that if the donation is coming in, always create that donation based on the account, not on the CEO's contact record. If you start from the CEO's contact record, you may find that it ends up as their donation. But if you stick to just attributing it to the account, and
I put something in chat, some documentation that talks about donations and how you do that for contacts versus accounts, and so make sure you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I mean, you'd want it as a soft credit anyway, though, wouldn't you? Because it's not actually, I don't know, would you ever? Oh, but it sounds like you actually want it as a hard credit, even though it's an organizational donation.
Well, I mean, this gets into some of the messier stuff, and I don't want to.
Yeah, no, it's probably not. Yeah.
But I think there are cases. I mean, it all depends on whether you're taking a legal perspective. If you're taking a legal perspective, what is your definition of hard credit? If it's a legal definition of they donated the money, then NPSP supports it fairly well. If you wish to take a donor-centric view and say, well, it's a hard credit if they think it's their money and they gave it. Then NPSP has not doing it.
Right. Got it.
And when third parties are involved, it gets a little messier, but that's going to get all better in a few releases. So.
I think this is what you were referring to, Leslie. In MPSP settings, this always roll up to the primary, which does seem to suggest, yes, even if the opportunity is not from an individual, it will roll up. But if you leave
the word always,
that's right. But if you leave it, if left unselected, then only the organization gets credit for the opportunity. Thank you. Okay. Dodie is saying, how will it all get better and when do we think that will be? We all have to be predicting. We're all waiting for it, aren't we? I know that people have been working on it.
Well, they announced at Dreamforce that they were going to replace the roll-up engine, and we know the work is in progress. The product manager Judy is completely tight-lipped about when. So we're not going to know that till they just disclose. But we know that they're working on a much more configurable engine that will address a whole lot of the problems that people have had. But that's roll-up, not affiliations. So.
Yeah.
Okay, I think, Dodie, this is part of the nonprofit success pack, not a general Salesforce thing. In fact, I mean, it's one of the things, isn't it, that actually in the nonprofit world, we use contact. We really kind of push the boundaries of contact roles, don't we? We use them far more extensively, opportunity contact roles, probably than in the commercial world. So we get all worried about these sort of soft credits and can we have influencers and things like that, which I think generally in Salesforce, everyone's like, oh, why are you bothering? It's interesting. So it was an interesting question a little way back from Joanne Crabtree, which will take us in a slightly different direction. This is talking about the kind of combination of affiliations and campaigns. So she says that they're both B2B and B2C, so they use the household model and affiliations. One thing we struggle with is displaying relevant information within Salesforce and on reports. For example, our campaign members show the household account rather than the organization that the contact is representing. We also have a lot of overachievers who have multiple primary affiliations, or main affiliations, shall we say. When they attend an event, they may represent organization A, but the next time they come, they're representing organization B. Has anyone any suggestions for how to best show in a campaign member record or for a specific campaign which organization they're representing? So how can you bring affiliations basically into campaigns and campaign members? Any thoughts?
Right. Well, I was just about to look it up, but I'm not actually logged into an instance since I'm on my personal computer right now. My other computer still is not rebooted. But I believe that you can put custom lookups on a campaign member now. But I was just going to actually check if what I was about to say was true. But if you can,
I'm checking that right now.
I would put a custom lookup on the campaign member. If you do it to the account, it might be slightly confusing because there's already an account field, but if you kind of do your reporting cleanly enough, it could be fine. Or you might want to use the affiliation as the lookup, but that's going to be one level away from the account. And so, I mean, I would say that, I mean, I think I would slightly recommend putting a lookup to the account on it directly, and then you fill it in. When you could have a process builder, like a visual flow that automatically populates it with the account that's actually assigned to that person, and then you could overwrite it manually for people who you want to show a different account with.
And yes, you can add a lookup field to campaign member.
I've done it for custom objects. I just wasn't sure if it would take another account, but I don't see how it would even filter that anyway. So yes, great, thank you.
Great.
Yeah, campaigns and companies are a messy subject.
Yes.
We'll bring that into another one. Okay, so I think we've picked up most of the questions just at the moment. So I know, Terry, you'd mentioned you had some kind of tips and tricks, some things that you do with affiliations. Do you want to, have you got anything you'd like to show us?
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
We'll have to see. I have a screen up. I don't know what's it going to take for me to share my screen.
Try now.
Okay, let's see.
We can see you.
All right. Can you see my, what I've done is I've actually pulled up my contact in my live instance. So nobody do anything with this information. I looked at it. I don't think anything bad's here. But I just want to show, I have a lot of, this is my contact in my instance. So even our users have contacts in our instance, something I recommend personally. But, you can see that there's I have a lot of affiliations. University of Texas is, I'm a graduate, so that should probably be former, but anyway, it's not perfectly clean. I'm a member of Salesforce Saturday, a nonprofit user group. I have a church. I have a couple different roles at my own org, including, a board member. I have some former employment relationships. And for us, that's kind of our model. We want to track where people learned, where people worked, where people currently work, what kinds of nonprofits do they have board level involvement with. But it can be a real challenge to report on this. And that data is obviously hidden in this, hidden's not the right word, but it's hidden down in this related list of organization affiliations. And so a lot of times the frustration is that you can't report on that very easily. So I created my touchscreen is too sensitive here. I created a declarative roll-up that just lists alphabetically all the affiliations that I have, and it's a text field. And so it can be used in places, including on this page layout here, including on Salesforce One compact header screen, including in the highlights panel here. And most importantly to me, it's part of list views, and it can be one line on a report. I personally have just filtered it to be current affiliations, but I'm always using a report filter if the affiliation summary text field contains some particular organization. I want it to be included on the report. So that's a tip, I think, that makes living with the affiliation object a lot more livable for your users. You can do this with roll-up helper or declarative lookup, DLRS, however, I can't ever say the name of that properly. I learned recently that it's pronounced Dolores.
Really?
So anyway, that's a tip that I really like. Pardon me?
I always learn
we
at
use
least
Dolores
one thing in each session. And I always call it DLRS. So I'm happy to know that it's Dolores because that's an easier word to say.
That's what we refer to it as. Somebody was like, who is this Dolores person?
And then I wanted to show, is there any questions? I mean, I'm not trying to tell you how to do this. It's a declarative process. You can do it with Rollup Helper, which is a paid tool, or perhaps you can do it with one of the 3 free rollups they give you, or you can install Dolores, which is a free tool, and configure it. It's not beginner admin work, but it's not advanced work. And once you have it working, I think your users will be very happy that they can use it in list views and reports. And you might, we put it in our highlights panel so that you can see this highlights panel is kind of an advanced formula, but it just tells me all about the person right on the top line. Are they a volunteer? Are they a donor? How are they affiliated? What newsletters do they get? What should we ask them next, etc.
You're getting compliments.
That's just a form.
You're getting compliments for that in chat, Terry. You're getting compliments for your custom header, custom contact name in chat.
I stole this brilliant idea from, he now works for Salesforce, .org, in fact. Anyway, he presented it at Dreamforce about 3 or 4 years ago, the idea that you could put a formula field in the compact header. I wanted to show, what you can do with reporting. This is a report that involves the affiliation. There actually are no reports in the NPSG workbook except one that use the affiliation. I'm going to actually ask the sprint teams if they have any excitement around building us some. because I think there should be some standard reports to help people understand how they can use the affiliation object. But here's a report that I put together that shows it uses the affiliation object, and it finds all the contacts that have an affiliation object that involve UT. It's a little bit complicated because we have account hierarchy. So all the different, we're right next to the University of Texas, and so it's an important organization for us. And in fact, I can show you why in some numeric ways here because of this report. If I just go to the sum, you can see that there's lots of sub-organizations or hierarchical organizations involved with UT, but there's 871 people that we think are local to us that are involved with one of these UT organizations. And in fact, they have in total given us $37,000 or $38,000. And they have given us in kind, $11,000 or $14,000, I guess. And, anyway, you can see the overall impact of the organization here in one report. And this is something I chose UT because it's a public organization and because I'm proud that we have such a close relationship with them. But before we go into any church or organization or company, we customize a report and run this report to see what types of involvement we already have with them so that we can say, you're already doing a great job, how can we do more? So this sort of shows us the hotbed area for them. And so this type of report and this type of thinking is why I think affiliations may be one of the most important objects beyond just contact database and transactional information.
I had put something in the chat just to save myself for typing that we don't recommend putting DLRS and roll-up helper in the same org, and that is because the triggers can conflict. So,
Thank you for that. Definitely true.
And I am trying to post the link. We did a Hub Office Hours session last spring with Andy Fawcett, who created the tool, Dolores. And I was trying to post the link from our playlist, but my chat seems to have crashed for actually posting things. Sorry about that. But if you go to the Hub Office Hours playlist, where the recording of this session will be, you'll also find one from last March where we introduced Dolores, and there's a great demo from questions both from Andy and a great demo from Beth Breisners about how to set it up. Sorry for that interruption, but as I say, chat's not helping. I like your impact report, Terry, and how you're bringing all the affiliations together. That's awesome.
And then
I have one more thing to pass on from our solution architect, who I go to for these kind of questions, the Dolores and roll-up helper and things to think about. And he says, in general, Salesforce best practice is to only have one trigger per object. This isn't always possible due to managed packages, but adding multiple triggers to perform similar operations from different packages can particularly be an issue. So just something to be aware of. And it's especially because you can't control the order that those triggers execute in.
Right, very definitely.
Great, thank you for that. And thank you, Ali, for being my chat poster. Finding the link for me.
I wanted to show one more thing, if that's
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
I actually think that I said in the chat that, possibly the admin's not going to be the decider of whether you use a pure model or a hybrid model, or, pure is not even a good word. But anyway, whether you only use affiliation model or whether you use a hybrid model for connecting accounts and contacts. I think a lot of times it's going to be your governance committee, and I actually think it's a lot of times it's the business dev folks, the fundraising folks, or grant writing type folks who often are familiar with and need the direct attachment to the account. And so I put this dashboard together just to show what is possible. This is just a little dashboard that shows funds we raised by year, this year, last year, and 2 years ago. And it's individual donors, but what affiliations do they have? And so this chart shows us the hotbed of individual donation activity organized by where are they clustered together with some type of affiliation. And so, this happens to be my home church and the church that helped me found the ministry. So it's not surprising that they're the leaderboard. That means there's lots of individuals giving funds, but they have an affiliation to that particular organization. And our own organization name shows up next because of board giving primarily. And then you can kind of go down the list. I mean, and who they are is unimportant, but as development, at development team meetings, we go down this list and see if there's anything surprising going on here, or see if there's anyone high that we haven't, given sort of due diligence to lately. And so this sort of helps us know where we might have high impact with individuals. And I think it's really cool. And then anyway, and it leverages the affiliation really well. And then underneath it, I actually have donations from individuals that have no affiliations, which I consider a red flag. It's like, wow, we don't know enough about this person who's giving us money. And so I took the names off so that, I could show this dashboard, but it normally would have the name there, and we say, okay, it's an assignment for you to go find out more about this person because we don't even have one single affiliation for them. I just wanted to show that it's pretty useful.
That's awesome, Terry. What do you use as your base report there so that you're doing the donations? Is it a contacts with affiliations report, or how do you structure, what's the underlying report?
Excellent question, and I so wish that you could tell, enlightening, when you read, what is it? Really good question. I don't want to open the report because it would show the details that I don't want to show today. I believe that is affiliation. I believe that is a contact with affiliation report. And then the numbers are coming from the NPSD statistics for the contact. So I believe that's a contact with affiliations report.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Looking for contacts that have a giving history in the period of interest. And then I'm sorting them by affiliation. So it's there's multiple lines because it's contact with affiliation. Assuming I gave any money, you already saw that I would appear in that report 9 times because I have 9 different affiliations.
Yeah. So then you do a grouping that's by the affiliation rather than the contact. Yes. Okay.
Correct.
Terry, you are the poster child for using affiliations well, I have to say.
Yeah.
and then
I think if you're in B to C business, I think it really is the underleveraged piece of information that we all need. What I am sorry about is there's not enrichment services that sort of help us gather more affiliation data easily. We tend to find that a manual process, but
and then just back to the reporting thing again, for those components lower down your dashboard, the ones without affiliations, is that a contact report and a cross filter? So it's like show contacts.
That's a contact report. Yes, that's a contact report with a cross filter of without an affiliation.
Great.
And the number reported is just the hard giving total statistic provided by NPSP for that tag.
That's the last time you were on Office Hours, I ended up christening it the session of awesome dashboards or magical dashboards or something. You've just provided another one for us. This is 2 months in a row. Fabulous. Thank you, Terry. Does anyone else? Yes, apart from I am recording the session, Lauren, and we have a playlist of recordings in the Hub Office Hours group and the Power of Us Hub. That's the place to go to find it. I'll post it hopefully sometime over the weekend. Does anyone else have any other?
I have something I just wanted to throw out there as well. For people who are dealing with, so, you know, we didn't talk about the affiliation setting. Obviously, it's a very small settings page. But, you know, you can have the ability to turn on, to have affiliations automatically created for people or not. And the one thing I would say, and this is similar to using kind of the one-to-one account model, is that if you have a large number of records, you might want to not automatically create an affiliation for everybody for their primary account, you know, and only use affiliations for relationships to their non-primary account. So in the household model, that's kind of a moot point. But when you're not using the household model, you might want to consider, well, actually, for the household model, you should never have that turned on because it would give you an affiliation to a household. But for others, you just want to consider that that will be kind of cluttery and provide, and, you know, just have a lot of records that can go against your data storage limits. And so you have to kind of think carefully whether you want an affiliation for your primary account or not.
And I just want to point out, Sarah, that it actually doesn't factor in the household account because it takes it by the account record type.
Okay.
So
interesting.
So it knows if it's a household account record type, it's not going to do it. But yeah, great point.
Excellent. Thank you. And then the other thing is that because we have this turned off often, because we deal with large volume data, we do write workflow rules so that it kind of manages the current former aspect for us, since this setting does that as well. So with this setting turned on, when you change a primary account on someone's account, it will make that affiliation former and make a new affiliation with the new primary lookup to be current. And so we kind of replicate that functionality and workflow rules when we have this setting turned off.
I came across this the other day that was being a real pain. I was doing some updating for an organization, and I was updating some of the affiliations for them, and the MPSP kept changing everything to former that were still current affiliations, because it's interesting, of course, you know, because as we've been saying, you know, we leverage affiliations. We have multiple current affiliations. I did not want them all to stop just because I changed the primary. So, and I think, Sarah, there used to be in the standalone affiliations package, the older version, there was that annoying checkbox, wasn't there, that automatically created an affiliation every time you associated somebody with an account. And I have a number of clients who kind of didn't know about that checkbox and now have an instance that's littered with affiliations that they don't need. So yeah, that's one of the older features that I'm glad disappeared. Actually, very glad.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. I think this has been a really interesting conversation. Thank you, everybody, for being brave enough to dig into whether you should go with the mixed model or the recommended that everyone's in a household and everyone has an affiliation. And I hope we've given people some ideas about that. Thank you for the tips and tricks about the best way to manage this, and also. Please go ahead and look for more information about Dolores, which is obviously one of everybody's favorite tools, and some of the other things that we've mentioned. As I say, I have been recording this session, all being well. It will be posted over the weekend. So I just want to thank the panel very much for their time and for being willing to share their expertise, and in Terry's case also to let us have a peek into his instance. It's been great. Thank you for the interesting questions and the comments. And that's it. We will be back with a general Q&A session and another awesome panel next week. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, and have a lovely weekend.
And thank you, Caroline, for being
the hostess
with the mostest.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Now I'm going back to the paint fumes. I've got to. Okay. All right.
Bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye.